Sudan is threatening to sever ties with America after Washington criticized Omar al-Bashir's application for a visa. The Sudanese president wants to attend the next week's UN General Assembly in New York, but America says President Bashir will not be welcome. CCTV's Robert Nagila has more.
Complicated at best, the relationship between Sudan and the United States has taken a turn for the worst over Omar al-Bashir's visa request.
We are not abide by that. We care less about that.
Leaders from a string of African countries, Sudan among them, are due to address the UN Assembly in New York next week. But Washington's not keen for Bashir to visit. The International Criminal Court has an arrest warrant out for Bashir. That's for alleged crimes against humanity in Darfur. The Sudanese president has consistently denied the charges. But Washington says he should stand trial.
Before presenting himself to UN headquarters, President Bashir should present himself to the ICC.
America has long imposed sanctions on Sudan, but it's not a signatory to the ICC. And Sudan says Washington has no right to refuse or lecture Bashir.
We are not members, both of us. So they are not in a legally or morally justified position to admonish us.
As a host to the UN headquarters, the United States is obligated to facilitate countries or their leaders taking part in activities of the world body. However, it will not be the first time the United States has denied access to a visiting dignitary to the UN headquarters. In 1988, it turned down a visa for late PLO leader Yasser Arafat. Analysts say the U.S. is in an awkward position.
It's not in the interest of the United States of America to have al-Bashir land in their airport at JFK or in Washington to go and attend a United Nations meeting. But under international rules, regulations and norms, the U.S. is obligated to grant such a head of state a visa if he wishes to attend a UN meeting.
The U.S. is not saying whether it will deny the visa, merely that Bashir will not be welcomed. A representative for UN Chief Ban Ki-moon says it's up to America to decide on issuing a visa, but that Bashir should cooperate with the ICC. Robert Nagila, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Trials at the International Criminal Court against Kenya's Deputy President William Ruto and former radio journalist Joshua Sang resumed on Tuesday. Now, the first prosecution witness has been giving evidence at the International Criminal Court, but the ICC prosecutor claims that the motion by Kenya's parliament to withdraw from the Rome Statute is intimidating witnesses. The trial has begun amid opposition from the African Union and African states who suggest the cases be referred back to Kenya. And at a press conference in Beijing, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hong Li said the African voices should be heard and respected.
We've noted that the Kenyan public have different opinions about Ruto being tried at the ICC. Many African countries have objected to this. At the AU summit this May, the African Union decided that the case should be handed back to Kenya. Both President Uhuru Kenyatta and Vice President William Ruto were democratically elected leaders. We hope the international community will respect the people's choice and listen to the views of the AU and African countries.
Well, the ICC and its relation with African countries has been making the headlines on the continent this week. Let's hear more now from CCTV's Nick Harper, who's joining us from New York. Nick, following the diplomatic row, though, between the U.S. and Sudan, Sudan has threatened to expel the U.S. envoy in Khartoum. How is the U.S. responding to this?
Well, no official word yet from the US. We're expecting perhaps some sort of reaction out of the State Department later today, perhaps during their daily briefing that they have. But at the moment, they seem to be sticking to their guns, simply saying that President al-Bashir would not be welcome here in the US. That does, of course, create a very difficult situation for the Special Envoy, Donald Booth. We have to remember he's only been in the job for a couple of weeks. He's very newly appointed and has already got himself into hot water over a couple of other issues that he wants to try and resolve. resolve. He wants to try and work out border disputes between Sudan and South Sudan and try and work out the disputes about the oil flowing through pipelines, leaving those countries. Both countries, however, have said that they don't want any sort of interference from the US. The Sudanese government have even gone on to say that they want the US to lift all economic sanctions and take the country off of a list of countries that support terrorism. So a very difficult situation for him, being made more difficult by the US's sticking to its guns, keeping with that position.
Well, Nick, how is the United States, though, justifying its position not to invite Bashir for the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, simply it comes down to the fact that there is this 2009 arrest warrant out against him from the International Criminal Court in The Hague. He's accused of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, all to do with the conflict in Darfur. And the US is simply saying that because there is this arrest warrant out against him, he should really present himself to the ICC in The Hague before he comes to the United States. We've heard from the US ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, and she said that it would be deplorable if he was allowed to attend the United Nations General Assembly next week. But it is a tricky situation for the US because in theory, as the host country of the UN General Assembly, they should allow access and grant visas to any diplomats coming to this country, any heads of state coming to America, even if they have a dispute with that country. In the past, we've seen Fidel Castro of Cuba come here, we've seen President Ahmadinejad of Iran come here, and President Mugabe from Zimbabwe, who will be returning here next week. So they have allowed those people in the past, and some people are saying they should allow President Bashir in next week.
All right, Africa watching that development very closely. Nick Harper there joining us from New York. Thank you. Staying with that story, Rwanda suffered one of the worst atrocities in modern history, the genocide of 1994. Yet it is among several African countries that are not signatories to the International Criminal Court. Instead, it dispensed homegrown justice. CCTV's Jen Keo tells us more.
Well, Rwanda has long relied on community courts where the accused and the accuser face each other and state their case in public. Now that inspired the creation of the Gacaca courts in 2001. At the time, Rwanda's jails were packed with genocide suspects and the conventional courts could not cope. The Gacaca was seen as fast and effective and a way to promote reconciliation.
And the social cohesion is growing fast and unity among Rwandans because the culprits and victims are now working together in cooperatives that was never thought before. And again, we are seeing the healing of the genocide wounds taking faster than we had anticipated.
In 10 years, 12,000 of the Gacaca dealt with almost 2 million accused. Almost two-thirds were convicted.
It worked well for Rwandans because we had so many cases to try, in thousands, actually in hundreds, but it was cleared in so short a time that it would have taken more than 100 years had it been the traditional courts. And it could have swallowed a lot of our resources had we taken the traditional way of judging cases.
Well, it's a stark contrast to the International Tribunal for Rwanda in Tanzania, where there have been 50 trials of high-profile suspects and 29 convictions. Some critics say the Gacaca was selective, that suspects and victims suffered reprisals, and that many questions remain unanswered. But many Rwandans, though, have chosen to move on. Jen Keo, CCTV, Kigali, Rwanda.
You're watching Africa Live on CCTV News. Coming up, cracking the whip. Muslim Brotherhood cornered in Egypt as court freezes assets of its leaders.
President Robert Mugabe won another term in what the African Union and SADC observers described as a free, peaceful and credible election.
The election is free.
But the West isn't just about to lift the biting sanctions against Harare.
As for those old Western countries who happen to hold a different, negative view of our electoral process, we dismiss them as the vile ones.
Is it yet another classic case of double standards? Find out in Talk Africa this week.
Aye, aye, aye.
And shifting gears to North Africa now, and a court in Cairo, Egypt has ordered a freeze on assets by Islamists linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. And this comes as the state continued cracking the whip on the Muslim Brotherhood with a series of arrests of top officials of the organization. CCTV's Adel Mahroui tells us more.
The crackdown on deposed President Mohamed Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood continued after Egyptian authorities arrested 4 leaders of the group. Among them, Gihad al-Haddad. He is the youngest in the leadership and the mastermind for the group's international PR campaign. He foresighted the arrests and established a media office in London to keep the group's voice heard even when behind bars. In a statement sent to the media, the London office said, quote, "Putschists in Egypt are continuing their atrocious violations of basic human rights and rule of law and escalating crackdown against opponents of the military coup." And it also described the arrests as an attempt to silence every voice calling for freedom and justice in Egypt.
It was a big hit to the Muslim Brotherhood, but the bigger hits were before the arrests. Haddad is important. His arrest would cut the group's relations with the foreign bodies, whether media or lobbying groups, which have not been moving wisely lately. All this will help to limit the international pressure of the Egyptian administration.
To give a moral support to their followers, the group's newspaper published a quote by Morsi, saying he will keep standing until his last breath. It was a part of a 5-day-old telephone conversation to his family. Moreover, a court ordered to freeze the assets of many Muslim Brotherhood leaders.
The order came to tie the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood even more. This aims to prevent their money being used in illegal activities that would increase tension in the streets. But their money has not been confiscated.
Given that it was never a legal entity, the source of funding for the Muslim Brotherhood has always remained a mystery.
For decades, the Egyptian authorities have been chasing the Muslim Brotherhood, freezing their assets and holding their leaders in prison. But their financial resources never dried out, which made some analysts say that this crackdown will not stop them. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Let's now bring you stories making the headlines on the continent at this hour. The European Union will send 100 election observers to upcoming presidential elections in Madagascar. The European Union's ambassador to Antananarivo, Leonidas Tesapitsis, said an advance team would arrive next week and the rest of the group start deploying from the end of the month. The island of 22 million people holds presidential polls on October the 25th. Madagascar has been mired in a political crisis that has put a damper on the economy and driven most of the people deeper into poverty since a coup in 2009. Well, elsewhere, Russia's emergencies ministry says it will send a plane to Ghana to bring back the country's chief justice after he was hurt in a car crash. Lebedev is in intensive care at a military hospital in the Ghanaian capital, Accra. He was traveling outside Ghana's capital when authorities say a truck veered into his lane and struck his vehicle. It is not yet clear when Lebedev will head back to Russia. And finally, the cast and crew of the new Nelson Mandela biopic Mandela Long Walk to Freedom gathered at the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory in Johannesburg on Tuesday to officially launch the movie's trailer. South African actors who play struggle stalwarts in the latest Mandela movie were joined by the movie's producer Anant Singh to offer a taste of a movie that will not be seen in South African movie theaters until November of this year. The event comes soon after the movie's premiere at the Toronto Film Festival. According to producer Singh, the reaction to the movie was well worth the 25 years he has been working on the project. And to stay with us here on Africa Live, as we still have more news, views and analysis for you, including Nigeria's army claims to have killed 150 Boko Haram militants in last week's raid.
make major investments in China.
In child gravity.
Why we are living for?
That's a fundamental government.
Position on China's by leaders.
I think that's frustration would be have a dialogue, political change, and human rights.
Don't you think you should have human rights?
Dialogue. Ideas matter.
International news with the global perspective. World Insight is the only program with analysis from around the world, with lively discussions and feature reports. Tuning each week for World Insight, only on CCTV News.
A new report by the Nigerian army says a military strike on Boko Haram last week killed 150 Islamists and 16 soldiers. And this comes amid reports of dozens of troops killed. The strike took place at a Boko Haram camp in Nigeria's restive northeast.
The Nigerian Army's claim of a major offensive against Islamist insurgents on September the 12th came after reports indicated Boko Haram had ambushed a group of soldiers in the same area. At least 40 were killed and dozens of others are still missing. The forest where the alleged raid occurred is some 70 kilometers northeast of Borno's capital, Maiduguri. There had been speculation that Boko Haram had strengthened its presence in the remote area in recent months. Borno was placed under a state of emergency in mid-May when the military shut down the mobile phone network to block Islamists from coordinating attacks amid an operation aimed at crushing the insurgency. The military has claimed major successes in the operation, describing the insurgents as being in disarray. Since the offensive was launched, Boko Haram has been blamed for massacres that left dozens of students dead, as well as the mass killing of Muslims gathering for morning prayers, amongst other attacks. Peter Kaba, CCTV.
Well, dozens of bodies are still laying on the streets while thousands of displaced people have not yet returned to Bosangwa village in the Central African Republic, days after more than 100 people were killed in fighting between the forces of the new Central African Republic's president and those loyal to deposed leader Francois Bozize. Now, last week, Bozize's forces infiltrated villages around Bosangwa, which is located 250 kilometers northeast of the capital Bangui, destroying bridges and other infrastructure. Well, this prompted President Michel Djodia to replace his army chief. Seleka rebels ended Bozize's 10-year rule on March the 24th, and their leader, Djodia, then became head of state. Some of the villagers recalled last week's events.
They started to shoot at us, and we ran into the forest, and they chased after us to kill us.
Meanwhile, 7 people were injured when hundreds of migrants broke through a border fence from Morocco into Spanish territory on Tuesday, clashing with police in a raid. Now, government officials said in a statement that just before dawn, about 300 migrants tore down part of the 20-foot-high fence around Melilla, a Spanish-governed enclave bordering northern Morocco, and about 100 made it through. The statement added that 6 Spanish civil guards were injured, as well as 1 migrant who was taken to hospital after he fell while jumping over the fence. They were the latest of thousands of migrants who tried to reach Spain from Africa across the fence or by sea. Spanish officials say unrest in northern Africa has swelled their numbers in recent years. Well, let's now return to Rwanda for a moment, where early results show that President Paul Kagame's Rwanda Patriotic Front Party is cruising to a landslide win in parliamentary elections. Voting for a quota assigned for 24 female legislators has taken place. And many voters say these reserved seats are making a huge difference to Rwandan society. Jane Keo tells us more.
Few here expect anything less than victory for Paul Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front. But this day is not about that. Instead, Representatives from local and national councils are choosing 24 special women who are judged to have made a major impact on their community.
Women have just come up to speak out. You know, with our culture, women were not allowed to speak in public. We're not allowed even to maybe take a decision that would affect many people. But today, even young girls are seeing these parliamentarians as their role models.
Well, in too many African countries, women are treated like second-class citizens. Rwanda sees itself as a pioneer, not only in encouraging women into politics, but in giving them the biggest voice in parliament. The constitution guarantees at least 30% of MPs are women, but women can also run for the seats contested by men. In the last elections in 2008, women took 44 of the total 80 seats. They are hoping for a similar result this time.
We were able to deliver on our agenda, like on education and bridging gender equality.
And it's not just in parliament. Almost half the cabinet are women too. Many Rwandans say they can see the effect in a fairer society. Women can now own land and property and keep their assets separate should they marry.
We are happy we can now open our mouth and speak up through this initiative.
A woman knows what's right for the family, the community, and this is what they represent.
Still, some analysts say the women politicians should keep pushing for more.
Women still deserve their rights and space in the value chain wherever they are, and therefore we think they need to be developed in terms of policy issues, analysis, and then holding their leadership to account.
Well, one obvious marker for equality would be a female president, but for now, no one here is saying whether they could or should fill the shoes of Paul Kagame. Jane Keo, CCTV, Kigali, Rwanda.
Well, news making business headlines is up next with Penina Karibe. Penina.